I was teaching in Chivli. I'd been teaching there for about 2 years. And we had Archie while I was there. And then Vic was pregnant with Nell. And we made the decision that Vic wouldn't return to teaching because she's a teacher as well. She was teaching in Oxford. We knew it would be difficult to survive on one salary. So we talked about the possibility of working abroad. And she was keen on it, if that meant she could be a full-time mother. So I started looking for work. Got in touch with a friend who was working in Bahrain, and he said he knew of somebody who was looking for a teacher in Tripoli, and that I should get in touch with him. Because up until then, all we knew about Libya and Tripoli were basically three things, which was Gaddafi, terrorism, Lockerbie, Yvonne Fletcher. It was all grim. So it was a big leap of faith when he offered the job. It was hot, dusty, concretey, empty, but knots of chaos in vast expanse of dust and concrete. When you turn up at a new place, you're given a debriefing about what to expect and what to do, what not to do. And I was told that I would have been assigned a security officer who would know who I was and would be aware of where I was living and what I was doing, and that I needed to behave appropriately. And we were told to watch what we said on the telephone when we phoned home and watch our internet activity. There were protests in Benghazi that were ongoing. Egypt had already fallen and Tunisia had already fallen. So there was revolution in the air. But in Libya, they were always quite confident that nothing would happen because Gaddafi had such a firm grip, because the population was so small, and because the population was relatively well off compared to Egypt and Tunisia. The common feeling was that Gaddafi would prevail. There would be some disturbance. Westerners wouldn't be touched. That was the perception. But as soon as you started talking to Libyans around that time, they would say, something is coming. And I remember talking to a neighbour of mine, and he said, is your family still here? And I said, no, they've gone. This was after Vic and the children went. He said, good. He said, are you going? I said, well, I hope to. He said, you have to get out of here because it's going to be bad. I don't think anything can prepare you for being in that situation. You realise you are just one of thousands trapped. And when the system stops, there's nowhere to go. There is nowhere to go. I waited in the dark. It was beginning to rain. The city was silent. I had not heard the imams calling worshippers to the mosque that morning, despite having been awake since 2:30 a.m. My hurriedly packed bag was on the ground beside me, along with 7 litres of water, and the Maasai club I carry with me at times of severe stress, purely a comfort weapon. I've never swung a club in anger before. Would I have to do this morning? My phone rang, piercing the silence. It was a colleague. His voice was tight with anxiety. We've made it to the airport. There are a number of roadblocks, but most of the soldiers are sheltering from the rain. I've had an AK-47 waved in my face, but if you do as they ask, you should be fine. I stood looking at my glowing phone. It rang again. This time it was a friend from another part of the city. My driver has just turned up, on foot. He was stopped outside our camp, pulled from his car, and then had his vehicle machine gunned. I'm not going to make it to the airport today. The knot in my stomach tightened another notch. The phone rang once more. Another colleague. Don't cut through the square. We've just been pulled from our car and made to lie down in the road by soldiers at the roadblock there. His wife, mother and father had been forced to lay face down in the rain puddles as their car was searched by gun-wielding soldiers. They broke our driver's ribs, but they've let us continue. You need to be quick. They're very twitchy. The phone fell silent. Dawn was yet to break, and I was already tired. I pulled the car out of the compound, lights off, and headed off into Tripoli. And that's how those last few hours in Tripoli were. Those last few hours in our apartment. And we made it to the airport. There was a real feeling of having left with a lot of unfinished private business. You don't say goodbye to anybody. I saw my landlord, son, and that was it. And the next day, 2 days later, I was back in Chivli and the war was in full swing. It's a very unusual feeling because in our lives everything is quite certain. And suddenly everything was very uncertain, not just for us, but for all the friends that we left behind. And really, that's why I had to go back. I had to go back for practical reasons, to get our stuff, and also to see these people who we'd left. He was a very vicious man, and the people around him were very vicious. And he had no qualms about slinging people in jail or murdering them in cold blood. So if he felt that you were against him, he would have you killed. And it became apparent that a lot of people were against him. And so we naturally feared for everyone we knew, Libyan and African who lived in Tripoli.
Italia flight 68 to Tripoli through gate H9. Before the first family suite.
Hey, you don't have to. How are you?
All right, you.
Good to see you too.
How are you? How are you? Who are you? I got lost in your new airport. What have you done in there?
Nothing. I just want original copy of your visa. So I brought it with me. So
Libyans are the
problems.
friendliest, the kindest, the most generous people I've ever met. They can never do enough for you, particularly if you're a family. And Bassem was no different. He became a very good friend over the 18 months we were there. And he was always keeping a rather paternal eye on me and our family and making sure we were all right. And if you went out with Bassem, you could never pay for anything. He would pay for the whole lot. And I remember when Vic's parents came out to see us from Chivli, and he took us all out for a meal, and he paid for the entire lot of us. He just oozed generosity, and it's not uncommon. When I went back to Tripoli, I knew, without him saying, that he would be there to meet me.
I want to show you the place where you have spent the last day in Tripoli.
Lying on the floor down there for 5 hours. This place, just luggage everywhere, and just people on the floor. People who hadn't got tickets were in here. But that was 5 hours in here. And then I spent 7 hours outside this door.
Yeah,
7 hours by a sliding door. And the young guys kept coming out with their sticks and beating us back. I mean, they were clearly frightened themselves. They didn't know what was going on. The last time I'd stood there was the day I left. A friend and I, Hamis, stood outside a sliding door for 7 hours, watching it go backwards and forwards. And every now and again, some clearly agitated, frightened young policemen would come out from inside the airport building and beat the crowd back with batons. And there were thousands of people there and hundreds turning up by the hour. I felt oddly exhilarated by it. It's the sort of thing you see in movies. And for some reason I always thought it would be all right in the end, however uncomfortable it was. And it was very uncomfortable, standing for so long with people pushing from behind and then these young men beating us from the front. And so there was an element every now and again, a wave of fear, because you just were worried that there could be a crushing of people. After the 7 hours wait outside, we ended up getting into the airport, and we were then in the airport for a further 5 hours, which felt like progress for us. And then eventually we did get out, thanks to the Italians. And I remember sitting on the plane, feeling very relieved, exceedingly tired, because I was physically tired, but emotionally I was really tired as well. So when I was standing back by those very same sliding doors with Bassem and Ashraf, the memories of my last few hours in Tripoli did come flooding back. "18 months in Tripoli was more than long enough to make some very good friendships and some friendships that will probably last for a long time. And one of those friends was Hussam. He's a big character. He fills when he's entered a room, everyone wants to talk to him. But in the end, you end up listening to him because he's got so much to say for himself. I hadn't heard from him for the whole time we were out. So he was another character that I was very keen to catch up with and talk to about what had happened to him and his family. If anyone was going to get in trouble, it was Hussam. He spoke his mind. He wasn't frightened. And I don't think it was just bravado. He epitomised what turned out to be the feeling amongst his generation, which is one of anger, one of we've had enough, things have got to change. Hussam was a friend of a friend, and I met him because he had a Facebook page called Only in Libya, where he collected little anecdotes and images that were, to the outsider, were laughing at the regime and laughing at Libya. He was always treading a very fine line, but got away with it. And I'm sure he was closely monitored. When everything went up in Tripoli, he was picked up because of his Facebook activity. But he's an IT technician. He's clearly very bright. He's a maverick. And he's slightly wild, but he's a very loyal friend and someone who you could trust. He was driving home and suddenly he was surrounded by vehicles that forced him off the road. His mobile phone signal had been picked up and had been followed by security services. They drove him off the road and they arrested him and took him off to prison.
They're crowding, grouping people inside. Very, very.
How many of you in one cell?
4 by 6, more than 10 people inside. But the most crowded cells, which is the 2 meter by 2 meter, you can get 4 people inside. But the most incredible day and terrible day in Abu Salim, which was when the NATO airstrikes the administration building and the gates of Abu Salim. Abu Salim prison, it's a very huge building and compound. When we heard the airstrikes, we thought that it's the end. It's the end. But they don't care. And Abu Salim, I call them believers. They are not supporters, they are believers. They believe in Muammar Gaddafi. We thought that it's the end. Oh, yippee! We started smashing the walls. It was a concrete walls. Oh, wow. The commander of the Abu Salim prison, he was getting inside of our corridor. What are you doing? He said, if we saw you outside of your cell, we killed you immediately. They checked us if we have any weapons or something like that. This is a bullshit, man. We have nothing. They get us half naked. We have nothing in our shoes or stuff like that. And the broken glasses in the corridor. They made us walk. They tied our hands in the back. They covered our eyes. And they made us beside each other in the square. And they started smashing us. We can classify the people who were smashing us and beating us. You know, if the commander wasn't with the people, they will execute us immediately because they are like bloodsuckers. Like, they are not human anymore. They need just to kill us because we are rats. How come? I'm a human like you.
He only got out at the end when NATO bombed the gates and the regime finally fell. He and his fellow cellmates decided that they needed to break down the doors of other cells.
Guards, they went out of the prison. Then we started breaking the window. It was very solid window. It's protected by 2 frames and very good metal. Then we moved that window out. It's very small, but we got out from there. It's 4 meters away from the ground. We got inside, we broke the locks, and we got, you know something, the people inside each cell, it seems like you are getting them back to the life. You know, when you break, I think every lock, it takes 15 minutes. You know, when we open the door, it's like you get them out from a graveyard to the life again. You know, you saw people that you don't know, hugging them and crying and laughing. It's like Spartans. This is madness. we have no shoes. We rubbish everywhere. Rats and rats. I mean real rats. During the last days in the prison, we were like asking the rats to bring us food because there's no food. Hey, rat, come on, bring me some dirty dates. Leave me something, man. It's a very disaster. It's a very hard experience, but I learned a lot of stuff, especially praying to God.
27th of February 2011. I spoke with a friend from Tripoli on the phone last night. She told me their biggest fear at present is that Gaddafi will use mustard gas on them. She recounted some of the stories she'd heard and seen. When I asked her if she had any idea how many people had been killed by Gaddafi's thugs, she said she had none. However, one of her friends had told her that 32 people had been killed in her street alone. My friend's husband has not been home for 24 hours as he prefers to keep on the move, as he suspects the security forces will be searching for him because they know he's been protesting. He did phone her to say that his closest friend had been gunned down coming out of the mosque after evening prayer. She said families were having to bury their dead within hours of discovering their bodies. If this is not done, the bodies are taken from them and disposed by the state. No one knows where or how. It is her daughter's birthday today. She's not been out of the house for a week. Her husband is on the run. For us personally, one of the most alarming turns in the war was when it became apparent that black Africans were being turned upon by Libyans, pro and anti-Gaddafi. They were always the bottom rung of society. And it seemed as if they were all being treated as mercenaries. Now, we had a number of black African friends in Tripoli who we knew and had looked after our children, and Vida was one of them. And so we were particularly worried about her plight, because she was such a lovely, kind woman. And she used to look after Archie and Nell and come and clean our house for us. But above that, she was a friend of ours. So when we were back in Chivli, she was the person that we couldn't contact at all. We had no contact for her, and we found out latterly she'd gone into hiding for a year. So when I went back, she was one of the people that I most wanted to see. And boy, was I pleased to see her. And I think it's safe to say the feeling was fairly mutual.
Vida, where are you? Where are you? Where? Vida, how are you?
She wants to stay. I mean, that's where she lives and works, and she sends money back to Ghana from there. And her life is geared to living and working in Tripoli. And I suppose she's living in hope that the expats will return and work will come back. And I hope until that happens that she stays safe. When I first got to Tripoli, we didn't have a car for a few months, and that was the only way I travelled, was on foot. And it's the only way to find out about a place, is to walk and to go down the little alleyways that you wouldn't go down in a car. So when I went back, I spent a lot of time walking again, and you bump into people who you knew by sight, and you could pop into shops easily, and it was great being back on the streets of Tripoli.
So we're standing in the square, just down from the school that I used to walk through on my way to work every day, on my way home, continuing past a burnt-out car, smashed-up car, towards the other side of the square. And which Gaddafi lived? Mohammed Gaddafi used to live down here. Now, on my last day in Tripoli, I was going to come down this road to walk home, but there were soldiers standing down here, around the end of Mohammed Gaddafi's house. And in that green garage door there, at the end, there was a Toyota with a machine gun on top of it, pointing down here to the square. The soldiers were very jumpy.
Yes, ready for
very jumpy. Yeah. So I went down one of these side roads instead. Even I recognised that perhaps I shouldn't.
You shouldn't go this way.
This way was not the way to go today, or on that day.
And then, of course, I visited Gaddafi's compound, which has been decimated by NATO's bombing, then finished off by the rebels in their bulldozers, and now is a dumping ground for the builders of Tripoli.
This is not the first time you've been in here, I know, but how did it feel the first time you walked through there?
I mean, I can't describe my feeling. I mean, the place was. We cannot imagine that this day will come, that we can walk inside this. That was unbelievable.
And what would have happened to you if you tried to come through that gate?
They will shoot you immediately. We've had many of people who had shots. They have been killed just to try to...
Just going through the gate?
Yeah, through the gate.
Through the gate. And we're walking between two smashed buildings completely.
Yeah,
now, have these been smashed since the war, or was this NATO's bombing, do you think?
I can tell that this is from NATO's one.
Yeah.
From destruction that we had.
Yeah.
This is from NATO.
And the place that we're just surrounded by piles of rubble.
Yep.
Aren't we? And there's a burnt-out car on its roof. The palm trees are still standing.
Yeah, still standing. Yes.
Bust furniture. Incredible. Chaos.
And also, for example, from this, the place
from the bags.
Yes, from the bag here.
Bags of rubble.
Now, I think it has been used as a trash.
Ah, it's a dumping ground as well.
Yes, dumping ground now.
Fly tipping, we call it.
Yes, I don't think that.
17th of February was the date when the uprising started in Benghazi, and it then swept westwards towards Tripoli. So the 17th of February is becoming a very important date in Libyan history. That is the beginning of the end in many Libyans' eyes. And I wanted to go back for that day. It was almost a year to that day that I left. I left on the 22nd. So in my mind, there was a nice symmetry to it. There was also the first birthday of the new Free Libya. I went to Martyrs Square. When I was living there, it was the Green Square, named after Gaddafi's Green, and it's now reverted to its old name, which is Martyrs Square, which had been the site of many demonstrations in the beginning. It's the centre, it's almost the heartbeat of Tripoli, and it's a place where people gathered. When Gaddafi was alive, they gathered to say hello to him, and they now gather there to celebrate their new freedoms.
So we're now in what used to be called
Green
Square?
Green Square, yes.
Green Square. What's it now called, Bassem?
Martyrs Square.
Martyrs Square.
Yeah.
And this is where that huge portrait of Gaddafi was laid out, wasn't
Yeah,
it?
yeah.
That we saw on television.
Yes.
Museum's over there.
Yeah, the museum over there, yes.
And this is where Gaddafi used to watch,
You know there.
just up there.
You know the first beach.
Is that where he ranted?
Yeah, on top of there.
When I was still here, I heard a rumour that there was a big massacre here at the very beginning. That people came into the centre to celebrate what they thought it was the Gaddafi family fleeing. And then the security forces opened fire on the protesters
They
here.
came from that way.
They came from near the sea, towards the sea.
Yeah, they came in here shooting people with the bullets. I didn't see it, but a friend of mine, Ala, he's living here.
Above the bank,
Above the bank, yes,
Yeah.
here in the Mezran. They saw only blood,
just covering the square.
yeah, covered in many places in the square. Because once they have shot, people are running, trying to hide from the bullets.
Was it true that the forces then took all the bodies away? That they
Immediately.
They didn't allow.
Immediately, yeah.
So it cleaned up the place.
Yes, because Ala, he just found a washing car, washing all the square here and there with the water.
Just getting rid of the blood.
Yes, the blood, yes. Just to try to remove the blood.
The Mizrati rebels and the Zintan rebels started trundling their big vehicles out and their big guns, and there was a real macho air about Tripoli. So the guns were suddenly more apparent than they had been a few days before. They were being used, but it was definitely a message being sent, and I never felt personally at risk.
I can hardly hear. I feel as if I'm standing in the middle of something here. I'd like my back to the wall.
You okay?
Was he firing at me?
No.
Why did every cartridge hit me then?
No. How are you? Okay, let's go now. Okay, let's go.
The great thing with being in a Muslim country is that you know the combination of alcohol and guns is minimal. So you knew most people were sober who had guns, but there was still some angry young men around. But the actual day went off peacefully. I spent the day in Martyrs Square and the evening in Martyrs Square, which was amazingly well policed by these different militia. Thousands of Chinese lanterns that were let off into the air. Music was being played, people were dancing, the stalls were out, tea was being served, candy floss was being sold. So it was a fantastic experience. Still with a slight sort of Libyan edginess to it. Some youth would suddenly let off fireworks in his hands, and he would just stand in the middle of Martyrs Square with fireworks in his hand that were lit and that were firing. I was just wandering around Martyrs Square in the middle of the afternoon, getting ready for the celebrations that night, and there were people milling around like me, many Libyans, and I bumped into a guy who I didn't know, who turns out to be a teacher in Libya, and he had picked up a gun at the beginning of the revolution and decided to fight, and now has gone back to teaching.
They both took part in the fighting. This gentleman has just taken off his military suit because he believes that we started peacefully and we should end it peacefully. And for others still wearing the army uniform, because they still have to keep order.
It's something that is completely beyond my understanding, and I feel very lucky that I will never have to do that. I mean, I can't see a scenario unraveling where I have to pick up a gun.
Fight against you.
What were you doing before the war?
شو كنت تخدم قبل الحرب انت؟
A teacher. Oh, like me.
Yeah.
I'm a teacher.
حتى هو أستاذ طبعا أنا أستاذ وهذا زميلي كان هنا كان مدرس هنا في طرابلس في المدرسة البريطانية.
Will you go back to teaching?
اكيد حنرجع لعملي اكيد حنرجع لعملي اكيد.
By nature the Libyan society is a civil society, and his suggestion that you should not really listen to what is being said, that all militias and everyone is just civilians, and it's a peaceful society and it's a civil society, not an armed society.
بس ان الطاغية أجبرنا نحمل السلاح ونقاتل بالسلاح.
Well, enjoy the day. Enjoy the days.
تمتع بيومك قال.
ها؟
تمتع بيومك قال. يومك طيب إن شاء الله.
Thank you very much.
Well done. Well done. Thank you. Nice to meet you.
نكسل ليفربول.
Liverpool. Good. What about you?
ليفربول. Good.
Liverpool.
But I have huge admiration for every Libyan that did that. And you hear stories of Libyans who were born in this country who went back to fight. And it is remarkable. My big fear is that for a number of these young men that there was an adrenaline rush that will never be replicated, and they, given an opportunity to carry on fighting, they might choose that way. Now these guys were lucky because they had a profession, they had a job to go back to. For many Libyans, they're unemployed, and there's not a huge amount at the moment for them to do. But these guys, they knew they were teachers. They'd done their service for their country and were prepared to head back to what they were best at. Because there was a smallish expat community, the school was quite central to that, and a lot of parents would gather there in the morning and have a coffee before they went off to their work, having dropped their children off. The school held a number of events that were very well attended, and you knew people very quickly because you'd meet them at the school or the swimming pool or the beach. Those were the three places that you'd bump into each other. So very quickly it became central to everyone's lives who had anything to do with it.
We're now walking down into the playground, which is about the size of 2 netball courts. And all the shades have gone.
Yeah,
the grass is overgrown. The orange trees have their ripe fruit in them, but they're now dropping. And the murals at either end, some beautiful painted scenes of beaches and tropical paradises. We're now standing outside this was the oldest villa, wasn't it?
Yes.
This was the original British school, this one.
Yes.
And as it expanded, they rented villas beside this one. Everything's very dusty and locked.
Dusty and locked.
It's very sad.
Yeah.
Very
quite
sad.
Yes.
The white paint's peeling off the walls. The toilet door is still hanging off its hinges.
The theatre, the hall.
There's the hall, yeah. And the old British school flag is completely bleached, hanging very limply. And then in the very corner here was my science room, across this little, what is now a scrap of land that Martin used to look after this beautifully, didn't he?
Yep.
Used to water it every morning. The shutters of the science room are closed. I wonder if I can peek in. Empty. Completely empty. My displays are still on the wall. The science equipment's still on the... I should have brought my key. My old science room key. Toys knocked over and scattered. Very sad. And there's the office. There's the head teacher's office.
Ooh.
Where I sat.
Wow, hey, it's open.
And asked him if he would help me.
Maybe someone is here.
Help me get my family out. And he said no, he wouldn't.
No, it's not.
Because it didn't look good. He sat on his comfy seat in that office and said, no, I'm not helping you, Richard. It won't send out the right message. Year 3 and Year 4, the toys from reception, still in the pigeonholes, just as it was when we all walked out. Toys on the shelves, covered in a layer of dust.
Imad was an architect who worked for an American company. Like many companies, the Americans shut down their operation and left their Libyan employees behind. Some left their employees behind in a good state, others just fled and didn't look over their shoulder to see what happened to them. Imad has since left the American company and is now working with some other architect friends who I made in their practice in Tripoli that's reopened and is beginning to try and to get itself going again. I was talking to him about how he spent the war and how his family have felt since the war's ended, and he had some sobering thoughts and experiences that he gave me.
Libya has different situation than any other countries in the Arab world. what's happened in Libya. It's happened in Syria. It's happened in Bahrain for 1 year now. It's happened in any other countries. But Libya has a special condition because it's a rich country. Everyone needs to help the Libyans, not just for Libyans, but for their money. So that's why we need to be careful. Almost 64% of the Libyan are youth. So that means the next generation is us. So how we can get benefit of these people?
So what's the one thing that you think should be addressed, first of all? Is it education?
The first immediate thing is the security.
Coming back, I'm amazed by the explosion of creativity that has happened. You walk down the street and there are amazing pieces of artwork on the wall.
Yes.
You walk past newspaper vendors, and there seem to be dozens of publications that were never there before. You see entrepreneurs on the side of the road suddenly doing business where they weren't allowed to before, and I find this explosion of creativity incredible and exhilarating. But at the same time, I accept it's slightly uncontrolled, and everybody's off.
It's uncontrolled, but on the other hand, if you go in the same street, if you see a bank, you will find crowded of people crowding on that bank, needing the money. So we have two pictures at the same street. We need infrastructure of Libya. We need health for the Libyans. We need good education.
Hassan, thank you.
Anytime.
Thanks for everything. It's been great. Once I'm home.
Yeah,
Thank
sure.
you. Asra.
See you
Thank you. See you soon. Thanks for everything. It's been fantastic.
See you soon.
I don't feel like I've finished in Libya, and I know that I will go back because I've got many good friends there. But it sort of closed the chapter that we were on, rather than close the book. It was so good to see friends happy and healthy.